So, it's been almost as divisive as anything else, the post-mortem of what happened Saturday, as people have suggested, myself included, not on partisan lines as some of the others have, that even not knowing what was in the mind of Jared Lofton on Saturday, it would behoove us to take this opportunity to tone things down. And I find it objectionable for a candidate, a former candidate for the vice presidency of the United States, to talk about locking and loading and targeting members of Congress and then putting bullseyes on them. I'm not saying she doesn't have the right to do it, and I'm not saying that she was advocating the shooting of Congresswoman Giffords, and I am not saying that that had anything to do with what happened on Saturday, but I am taking this occasion as a reason to raise the issue again, which I raised long ago, many times, perhaps ad nauseum to you, my dear audience, that the level of political rhetoric has to be returned, if it ever was, to a more civil manner in this country. Well, of course, Sarah Palin, who has remained silent until today, hasn't, as one can imagine, taken that kind of suggestion or criticism very well or very lightly. Ralph, could you please play Sarah Palin's retort to all the criticism?
Like many, I've spent the last few days reflecting on what happened and praying for guidance. After the shocking tragedy, I listened at first puzzled, then with concern, and now with sadness, to the irresponsible statements from people attempting to apportion blame for this terrible event. President Reagan said, "We must reject the idea that every time a law is broken, society is guilty rather than the lawbreaker. It is time to restore the American precept that each individual is accountable for his actions. Acts of monstrous criminality stand on their own. They begin and end with the criminals who commit them."
I think you get the idea of where she's going with this. And she gets a little stronger in her condemnation of herself, calling it a blood libel. A blood libel. Again, I am not one who is connecting the dots between what Sarah Palin said in the past or did in the past to what occurred on Saturday, but I will criticize her for putting the bullseyes and saying locked and loaded and using the term target. When you put it all together, it is possible, even though we don't know that that was the case this time, that an unstable person could take that as a message to do something as horrific as what we saw on Saturday. That's all I'm saying. And if Sarah Palin believes that that's blood libel, then I am guilty as charged. Let's go to Jerry in Florida. Jerry, welcome to News Talk Online on the Paltalk News Network.
Well, thank you, Gary, and I'm glad you played that video. Do you disagree with it?
I don't disagree with anything that we heard thus far in the video. No.
You said you do not connect the dots. I respectfully disagree with you. You're connecting dots that are not even there. What do we know about Jared Lofton? We know that he believed the government was trying to brainwash him through the use of grammar. We know that he never watched TV news. That has been documented. We know he never listened to public talk radio. We know that. Right? Do you agree with that statement?
We know that there are those who have told reporters what you just articulated. That
All
we
right.
do know.
So in other words, we have some substantial basis of fact to believe. Now, what was the first thing that the progressive liberals accused people of, like people like Sarah Palin? that because of TV, because of talk radio, specifically two people in particular, Sarah Palin and Rush Limbaugh, have blood on their hands, so to speak, and using the word, using the metaphor of blood. But we now find out that this guy never listened to him. All right? So, who is responsible for the angst that we are going through right now? Who is responsible for this division in our society? The people who make false accusations and snide remarks. I want to go very briefly into one other thing. Mental health. Unfortunately, in the United States, once a person reaches maturity, it is almost impossible to make them accept medical help because they believe that figures of authority, as doctors, are against them. It is almost impossible for them to make someone take their medications. I know of 3 people right now who will refuse to take lithium, for instance, because I got involved in that. So I'm sorry, Gary, I have to respectfully disagree with you. Your slanted comments don't do you justice. Thank you, but I still respect you.
I don't think my comments are slanted. I think my comments are consistent with the position that I took long before this occurred. So
I'm talking strictly about this particular circumstance. Thank you. With the other ones,
I have said, Jerry, many times, we do not know what was in the mind of this individual. We may never know what is in the mind of this individual, and it may have had nothing to do with the political rhetoric.
Then why demonize Sarah Palin and Rush Limbaugh if you don't know that?
Well, I would demonize, if that's how you want to characterize it, Sarah Palin for what she did regardless. Remember, there were people who did exactly the same thing with regard to an abortion doctor who was then gunned down. And not one, but 2 abortion doctors. They put the person's picture and a bullseye over them, and both of them were murdered. And so you mean to tell me that? I want to ask you, Jerry. Don't you think that somebody with the kind of following as a person who ran for the Vice President of the United States, who is a national figure, who has a best-selling book, who has a television show, who is recognizable, probably more recognizable than almost anybody else in this country, perhaps other than the President of the United States, instantly recognizable, should be a little bit more responsible about how she campaigns for her favorite candidate to unseat Congresswoman Giffords?
I cannot argue with that because I agree with you on that individual point. I do. I do not believe that Sarah Palin is presidential material. I don't. But I strongly disagree with the rhetoric that came out immediately after this and the hundreds of posters that I saw with a target of Sarah Palin and crosshairs across her chest.
Well, if that happened, and I didn't see,
do you have anything to say about that?
I do. I do. I say the same thing.
Do you have anything to say about Obama saying, "Bring a gun to a fight"? I grant you that he said, if someone brings a knife, you bring a gun. I grant you. But the use of those words are also prejudicial and reflect the same situation.
I agree. You're making my point. But see, I say it in a nonpartisan fashion. I'm opposed to it when either side does it. Now, I wasn't aware. That there are signs that with crosshairs on Sarah Palin. I'm opposed to that as well. I'm not just saying this because I'm left of center. in some areas I am left of center. In some areas I'm right of center. I'm not a partisan. I am actually not only nonpartisan, but as you know, Jerry, I'm anti-partisan. I don't like partisan politics. I think it's injurious to the country. And
you're following my point, but let's go back a little further. What legitimized this viciousness of personal attacks against politicians or people in authority? Who and what?
Well, this has been going on.
I give you the demonization. I know, but I give you the demonization of George Bush. Okay, I grant you. You go back in history and read what they said about Abraham Lincoln, about him being an ape and all this stuff. Yeah, but lately it has gotten bloody, figuratively.
Jerry, it started with Bill Clinton. Hillary Clinton killed Vince Foster. We know that. How many people did the Clintons have killed? Political enemies. I mean, this crap started, then. It started even.
Who believes that? Nobody believes that.
You don't believe it because you're a sane individual.
Obama won the election, not because they voted for him, but the media demonized Bush to the point that they voted for anybody but Bush.
All right, but I don't know whether that is really apropos to the discussion at hand, Jerry, frankly. That comment. I don't see what that has to do with the discussion at hand. The fact is both sides are guilty of this. When President Bush was depicted as Hitler, I found that repugnant. Okay? Just as I find putting crosshairs on a map and saying that we're locked and loaded and we need to target somebody, I find that repugnant. As I have said before, as I have written before, we who have a bully pulpit, whether it is a Sarah Palin or a Rush Limbaugh who have huge bully pulpits, or a Gary Baumgarten who has a very select, discerning audience, we have a responsibility to make our points in a responsible manner so as to not perhaps inadvertently even put a stupid idea in the mind of an unstable individual. And when you say who believed that, there were people who believed that. Who believed Sarah Palin when she said Obamacare had death panels? About half the United States believed that because it was repeated over and over and over and over again by politicians, by so-called news people, and by pundits. That's not true, and it created a lot of angst with people. So, both sides have some accounting to do, in my opinion, for their political rhetoric.